All right, nice. Then I'll start quickly. I'm not going to say too much because I see that a couple of people have been in the last webinars as well. So you'll feel like this is a broken record. So my name is Laurent. I'm from Switzerland, studied business and economics, worked at UBS, got fired in the financial crisis. Then by luck joined Deal, my first startup experience, where I met Nenad and Luis, by the way, both of them. Was responsible for the e-commerce area there. After that, co-founded Movu, the moving platform, together with Nenad. Sold that to Ballo successfully in 2017, stayed on as the CEO for another 3 years, then moved over to Bexio, where I was the CEO for almost 2 years, leading them to profitability and doing a technological turnaround, which was also very interesting. And then last summer decided to be entrepreneur again, now fully focused on Holycode and on making other startups technologically more successful. So yeah, we're serving the community now rather than our own product at the moment. That's me. I'm also married, have 2 kids, but yeah, probably here that doesn't matter so much. Over to Nenad.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's great to be here. And my name is Nenad. I'm coming originally from Serbia. I have a technical background. So I studied computer science and worked for several companies in the past, also some in Serbia. I started my first startup in Serbia, which, surprise, surprise, failed. It was the first one. And that was actually the reason why I decided to move to Switzerland, where I believed, and I still believe, that we have quite a good startup ecosystem. Then I joined Deal. Lauren already mentioned a lot of the things we'll repeat through same as with Lauren's story, because we worked together on many projects. But yeah, joined Deal, stayed there for 4 years as a technical lead on different responsibilities over the years. Then co-founded Movu with Lauren, and also we started Holycode at that time as well, because we needed development for ourselves. Stayed until 2020 as a CTO at Movu. Afterwards, I moved to Bexio to be a CIO, and I was in charge of actually restructuring the tech team and also the technology in general at Bexio. And after that, joined Holycode full time. Besides that, also invest a little bit in startups, try to support community. So we try to give back because we also had a lot of help during our Movu times and when we started. I'm also married. I live in Switzerland now for the last 12 years, and I have 3 kids.
Thank you, Nenad. Hello, everyone. My name is Luis. As you heard, I also worked at Deal in different departments and roles. And after Deal, I worked for a couple of or several corporates because I wanted to understand how they work and make decisions. One of them was Porsche in Germany, Liberty Global in Switzerland, also Swisscom. So I tried to understand how they work. And currently, I wanted to go back into a startup again after Deal. I became one of 4 founders at Covolution. Maybe you've heard of it, the car subscription in Switzerland. My role currently is COO and also member of the board. So I will tell you a bit more about the startup side. I'm not that much into products as Nenad and Laurent, but we will see afterwards. I have a girlfriend, no wife yet, and no kids. And I like to do sports a lot. And my background is I used to code myself, then did a finance bachelor and after that marketing. So I'm a generalist, I would say. I don't have a special niche where I'm a pro, but I can communicate with almost every department.
Great, thank you very much. I think we just talked about that right before the webinar, because we said it's proof of concept versus MVP. What is the difference? Because people tend to throw that into the same bucket, but it might not be. And we just had a discussion about it. And maybe Nenad and Laurent and Luis, maybe just quickly share what you understand on the definition. And then I'm obviously very curious to hear how you all entered into that, how you got involved into this. What is your personal experience with the transition from a prototype to an MVP? So Laurent,
which one first?
Yeah, or Nenad, yeah, sure.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I can share my view. I believe prototype or proof of concept And then from another side, MVP, they have a very different purpose. While proof of concept or the prototype has a goal to show your idea, and it doesn't have to be fully functional or operational. From another side, we have the MVP that is really like the fully functional piece of software that can really serve customers on an everyday basis. That's just my view on this. I don't know, Laurent or Luis.
No, maybe Luis from your side, because you brought that question up and I thought it was a good question.
Yeah, to be honest, before that webinar, I didn't really think about this question so much. That's why I also asked you guys. From my point of view, I share it. I mean, a prototype is really more like the idea or the shell, so to say, and the MVP is then something you go live and it's really working. It's like the first iteration of your product or your service, whatever.
Yeah, I also made a LinkedIn post this morning about it by chance. I would like to say that I thought about it, but it was actually by chance that I put it today, where I look at that, like, what are the different stages? And as Nenad said it, I think the proof of concept or the prototype, they're more or less the same thing. And then afterwards, the MVP is where it gets a bit more sophisticated and a bit more tricky. But yeah, you shouldn't go there too early because you'll spend a lot of wasted resources if you jump past the POC prototype phase. And I think we'll talk a bit about that afterwards as well.
Yeah, that would come right now, actually. What are the critical steps that are involved in the transitioning process from a prototype to an MVP? I'm sure that all of you have experienced that. And do you have can you share your experiences there and what you think are the critical steps?
I can start here if you like. What we realized, or what I realized, is that you need a really clear definition of the features so that people really talk about the same first. And the second step is you have to prioritize them. And I think this is the tough part. It sounds maybe easy, but defining the scope of an MVP is a pain for both sides. I think Nenad and Laurent can describe more like the developer or product management side. But if you own the product or if you want to develop yourself, somewhere you have to draw a line. And this is it, or for me, it was always very hard to get rid of features for a first release. This is a tough process.
Maybe I can add to that. I think I actually agree with all the points. Just would maybe extend it that we should also consider the learnings from the prototype. Sometimes we are a bit biased. It's our baby, it's the MVP that we want to build, and we don't listen to the feedbacks that we get from the customers on the prototype or potential customers. But I would be careful there because prototype is still not a functional software, right? So actually you have to really try to filter the feedback in a way that if you get a couple of verifications for certain feedback, then you should consider it. If it's just one off, then probably you have to actually research more on that. So really consider the learnings from there. Then also we call that the discovery phase, which I would do after the prototype, which would really look at the goal out of there would really to get the clear scope of the MVP and with the backlog as well. And you should try to stick to it. We tend to actually extend the MVP scope quite easily. There is something that we call customer-driven development. And if you get the feedback from someone who is close to you, hey, this should be changed, you immediately jump and try to change the MVP scope, which then can go really for a long time. Like you can always add more things, and then your deadlines are always being moved. And then I would also consider having a really capable team that can carry out your MVP, because this is your business card to the outside world. This is your first contact with the customers where they really try the product, and it has to work. So yeah. And maybe also important part is the plan. This is more from the technical side, to plan the release properly. We tend to have deadlines, and there is the same internal and external deadline, but I would always make a separation there. So we have an internal deadline, and then maybe 3-4 weeks after that, the external one, so that we make sure that we actually fix all the problems that arise after the initial deadline. So yeah, that will be just additional few points.
Yeah, great. The only things that I can add is there's a trade-off. The longer you can go with your prototype or proof of concept before building the MVP, the more you will learn. and the more sure you are that what you're going to build next as an MVP is actually in line with the needs of your customer or customers. The downside of it is the longer you wait, the bigger your MVP will become, right? So because you then will add these and these and these features, and maybe you've already added them to the proof of concept, but you can now not undo that. So you have to build an MVP that is maybe bigger. Maybe you can take it out in the beginning. So there's a feature size and timeline trade-off that you have to be aware of. I advocate for waiting as long as you can, because the learnings you will be making on the prototype, as Nenad and Luis also said, will really translate into a better MVP. But you have to be aware that the longer you wait, the longer it will take you to build MVP, the more expensive it will be, and the harder the discussions will be to reduce the MVP size to go live at the beginning. So that's a bit of a trade-off.
Talking about discussions, Luis and Nenad, you've both mentioned that. Luis, how do you deal with, I mean, I'm sure there are tensions within the team. It's not always an agreement how you should proceed with what you should proceed. How did you manage those conflicts? Did you have a rule of this is how we deal with it? You know, a certain amount of internal upvotes, or how did you manage through those discussions, Luis?
I mean, this is not coming from software building in our teams, but what we really do, we give kind of votes to each participant, and then you can basically vote features or strategies or whatever up or down. But still, it's democratic, but it's still sometimes it's quite a heated up discussion. You're right.
Yeah, maybe just to add. Actually, with Movu, we by far did not do it properly at the beginning and had a lot of challenges there. But over time, we became better. And also now, especially now I'm in charge of the organization in our company that is really dealing with the digital products in the early stage. So I get to see a lot. And I think it's really, we all have the opinions, right? But if you have a data, the decisions that are made based on the data, and that really the numbers are showing clearly the direction, then usually helps a lot. And what I would also say is that we try to bring always technical and business teams together as early as possible, because then there is much more understanding than on later stages if the tech team just joins afterwards.
You just mentioned it, you see into a lot of companies. Are there any common pitfalls that you see over and over again that in your view, you know, you see them, it's like, oh, I've seen this 1,000 times, doesn't work. Things that you encounter often.
You mean when building the MVP? Like the problems that I typically see that extending of the scope of the MVP, which obviously affects the budget and affects the timeline when you want to release. From time to time, I see this customer-driven development where basically even after the release of the MVP, you know, we have a plan for a sprint, and there is someone who tries to stop the sprints and said, "Hey, no, this is now more urgent." I would always say, okay, don't interrupt at least the sprints. Try to adjust after the sprint is done. Otherwise, you break the whole the consistency and the concept, and you lose time. What else quite often happens? Like monitoring or actually monitoring the progress, let's say. I believe that if you have a deadline to release the product, you need to split the deadline to make a planning for delivery so that you can check it regularly on every 2 weeks, every sprint, and see if you're on track, and make sure that you actually adjust early on if things arise. And there is always something going wrong. I never seen that product was delivered as it was planned at the beginning.
So leave enough room, like margin for error and correction, make a proper project management plan, and then also mark the milestones and really make sure that you leave enough also for like the external change requests or whatever have you. Yeah,
exactly. So that you can adjust as early as possible.
And I want to double down on or stress that point again. Don't break, if you work with sprints, don't break the sprints, right? Or if you work with Kanban, don't try to suddenly reprioritize something that is already being worked on. Nenad was in the beginning of our company, he was called General Nikolic because he was so strict about this. But I think that was one of the reasons why we were getting things shipped quite quickly at the beginning. But it means that you have to have a proper prioritization discussion before you get there, right? So like Louis said, but I think this is really, it's so easy to get lost in the urgency of things and always interfere, and it's just going to slow you down massively.
Do you have any strategy that you would recommend for defining and building like a core flow of a project during this, you know, transition phase? Is there anything you use, or do you have any strategies that you say, I always do it like this?
You mean for the transition from prototype to MVP?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is probably relatively difficult to define for everyone at once. But what I think helps a lot, I mean, obviously you will do user stories and you will have a backlog of them, etc. But I think what helps a lot to start from is the customer and internal employee journey, that you really map this on a sort of flow chart and you say, what are the 2, 3, 4 core flows that we need to be able to deliver a good experience on to the customer and to our employees internally, so that we can say this MVP works, right? And if you map that out properly, from there, it's visual, everyone can understand it, can challenge it, you see what you've been missing out on, and from there, it's relatively straightforward to then come up with the tasks that you want to actually develop afterwards. It's not straightforward to define where it ends, you know, what is in the MVP and what is not, as Louis already said, but I think this visual documentation in the beginning is a super good help to really figure out what to do and what not to do. But maybe Louis, you also have different opinions.
It's a bit on a different topic here, but I think you also have to differentiate if you build an MVP for a product within your company, you know the audience very well, or if you build an MVP for the open market. I think people tend to ask the people they know that share the same opinion. So what I always tell people, if they have a new idea or a new product for the open market, talk to the people you think they don't like it. And this is also if you create an MVP, because if I just ask the friends, I know they will exactly want to have it like I do. I won't have a diversified opinion on an MVP. But in my case, I mean, we are building products IT-wise internally mostly. So we know the audience quite well. And then we take the approach Laurent mentioned, that we really have the stories ready and then we prioritize everything accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Maybe just to add one more aspect there is that I see quite often is in all the customer flows, usually we need to collect certain data from the customers. And actually many times it's sensitive data, like a phone number or address and stuff like that. And I believe that good strategy is really to have a low entry barriers, to split the questions that you ask the customer into few steps and try to, with every step, build more trust. So by the time you need to really ask for the sensitive information, customer has already given you a lot and actually trusts the platform more than at the beginning. That actually proved to be quite true in the past when we tested.
I'd like to throw in a question from the chat. It's from Christopher, and he says, I have a question on MVP regarding design versus engineering. Generally, how do you design when design has reached minimal viable stage? So you pause design and start to build. For me, with the mobile app, I'm worried about building an MVP app if the design is not mature. It feels like my time is 70% design, then 30% building it. Any experiences of your own? Meant to ask how you decide when the design is viable in order to build without too much redesign based on feedback, then rebuild, keeping that loop tight.
I think this will happen anyway, right? So, and maybe the others have other opinions on this, but we always had these discussions in any company that I've been working on. And I think the main problem you have with design is you want to over perfect it, right? You want to make it, I'm going to exaggerate it on purpose now. You want to make it pixel perfect. But what you forget by doing that, you're trying to create something shiny that you don't know how well the customer really likes it. So you should really try to go exactly the opposite direction. Say, make it the crappiest, shittiest version you can come up with, sorry for the language, and put it out, be ashamed about how it looks in the beginning, and learn and learn and learn, and then iterate, because you will, a lot of the design design decisions you make are based on assumptions that you first need to test. Now, obviously, this is different in the prototype and proof of concept phase where you don't know anything of the market, and the MVP phase where you already know a bit more about what the customer wants and needs. But what I would try to do there as well is not design the MVP in a very different manner unless you're really sure that this is the way to go. Right? Because the thing that happens is then you build an MVP, which is going to take you a long time. And if you start changing the user flows, start changing the look and feel of the app and making it perfect, then you'll release something much bigger than you should. And you don't know whether this was the right direction to go. And it has taken you a long time. So my approach to design was always and will always be try to make it somewhat nice looking, but in a way that you always think, this is not good enough. And then iterate with the feedback you actually get from the clients, rather than trying to have something glossy up front and then maybe figure out that you completely missed the point because you didn't see something or you missed an assumption. But I've never had a designer's eye. So yeah, that's how I've approached it. Louis, maybe you have a different opinion.
No, I fully agree. There might be some apps or ideas where design is crucial, depending on the audience. But no, I really agree that design should be or can be iterated over time quite easily. What I did sometimes, or what I do when people complain about design, I show them the first iterations of Instagram or very famous apps. If you look at these apps now, it's really horrible, but they already had tons of users on their platform. So you should really go live and become better over time. And by the way, to me, the same is true about features. If you overload a product in the beginning, in the MVP phase, people can't adapt and learn it over time. That's why some people have problems to get used to products that exist for a long time, because they have so many features in there already. If you don't grow with the product, it's almost impossible to use it without a proper introduction.
So in short, you should use sort of the crappiest version and then ask the people that are the most critical customers about it. That would be my summary of the learnings. Are there any other tips or tricks for validating the functionalities and viability of an MVP?
Before you go live or after you go live?
I guess, well, before, I'm sure you have lots of discussion, probably, well, afterwards.
Yeah. Maybe I can step in there. But again, I'm more coming from the technical perspective. So what we tend to do often is to try to have some monitoring. So there are tools like Hotjar, analytics, also like more low level, like monitoring and profiling of the system itself, where you can spot quite quickly the pitfalls for the customers, or where they get troubles, where they get stuck or they don't move. And then I think what is also a good idea is always when you release it only to a small set of the, let's say, close to you customers that basically will act more like a friends and family, or maybe some close business partners that can actually try to use the system and give you the feedback before you go full speed on.
And I think another thing that is really good before you start the MVP, if it's possible, you need a certain amount of clients or users, is to do the product market fit survey by Sean Ellis. I think we also talked about that in one of the last meetings, because it's gold, right? I mean, in the end, it really tells you exactly which users love your product, why they love it, and also the users that don't love it, why they don't love it. And this will give you a lot more clarity on what are the core features or these core streams that I said you need to lay out before, so that you really understand what you want to build going forward. And you can measure all these data points already on the, not all of them, but a lot of them already on your proof of concept prototype if you do it well. But the written or the interview feedbacks from people are really the best source of defining what you might be missing or what you might need to focus on. Then once the MVP is live, a lot of it can be done via the tools and tracking, where people click, where they stop, where they abandon, these sort of things. Then it becomes more data-driven.
We have a question in the chat from Gabriel that says, is it a good idea to lower the scope of the MVP and accept help from the community on the less important features? Was that question answered or?
Not yet, I think. So Gabriel, when you say get help from the community on the less important features? Does that mean external people are building it for you, or you're just outsourcing it to them and say, I don't know, talk to that person if you want this, or what was meant by this?
Doing the prototype, while presenting how it works, I have managed to build a little community around the product. And when heading towards the MVP on the functional product, some of the people have offered their help. And this is a moment where there is a decision to be made. Do we accept their help and let them have parts of the features as their own projects, like open source projects that are linked to us? Or should we strive to keep it in-house?
So yeah, I mean, you said on the less important features, right? On the core flows, I'd never let anyone else than the people you really want to work on, because it's just the damage to the quality of what you're trying to build can be deadly. On the less important features, if they can, so one, if it's easy for you to stop it if the quality is not good enough, and two, if you have a good feeling or a good sense that the quality of what they're building is good enough not to really damage your reputation or the system, why not? You can give it a try, right? Because it will reduce the scope of what you have to do. You'll be faster with your time to market. So from that perspective, I think that could be viable. Like at Bexio, we've built this marketplace over time, where any client, any company out there can build via the APIs their adjacent solutions to the core Bexio module, and offer it to clients. We just had a quality gate where we made sure that certain things have to be in place. And that helped quite a lot, especially in the niche areas, for certain types of users. But that only really caught on when the platform was quite big, right? So now they have like 200,000 users, 70,000 clients. So now it starts to really make sense to have this marketplace. I think in the beginning, the more you can focus on certain things, the better. If you don't really need those less important features, try to go without them. If you have partners that you think quality is good and it's easy to stop it if it's going to be damageable, give it a try. That would be my first thoughts. Maybe Luis or Nena, do you have different opinions?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly. To be honest, I would actually only go for that if it's this marketplace concept where basically they are in charge later on for their piece of software. They have the customer service for that if needed. Otherwise, you might be too dependent on the external that you cannot control. I mean, just one funny example, that was really a long time ago. With Daniel, we integrated with Salesforce, and it was a synchronous integration. And at some point, Salesforce was under DDoS attack, and our system was blocking, basically because it was a synchronous connection with the system. So we couldn't operate. So I think you really have to watch out on the risks there. And maybe just to add one to the previous question about how to test, one good use case that I have, or like showcase, someone that worked at the gaming industry told me that they released a game which had a chat between the players, and they were actually sniffing the chat or looking what the players are talking about the game. And that gave them extremely valuable feedback to actually improve the product. So try to also, in this like kind of gamified way, actually try to collect the feedback from the customers, because that actually is really the honest feedback then, you know.
So you have your MVP and you want to iterate, maybe need to iterate based on the user feedback. How did you make sure that you keep, you know, the development momentum, as I would say, you know, how do you make sure that you, maybe something that you thought was great is actually the customers don't like it at all? How do you manage through that? I would like to give Nenad that question first.
Okay, thanks. So I think if you're talking about the MVP, this is really the crucial to release the MVP as soon as possible so that you can actually start getting the feedback. And if you make the scope of the MVP small enough to cover the MVP, but also not extend the development for more than 3-4 months before the release, I think during that period, you won't get actually a lot of feedback because there's no product going out. But after that, there actually the question comes. And there I would again make sure that we don't jump on every feedback from the customer, but only to the verified ones. So again, don't interrupt the milestones, the sprints, only adjust after the sprint is done if you really have the verified feedback from the customer for something. So therefore, also that's linked to the design question. I would actually release it with a as Laurent said, semi-good design, because you will start learning faster and you will anyway change. There was no single product that I saw that didn't change the core after the MVP release.
As you move forward, I think resource allocation is always a big topic, obviously. And how do you allocate that? How do you work with that? You know, time, budget, personnel effectively. You know, as you move forward, how do you deal with that? I think it's also a question for Luis in particular. Now that you know Carvolution is quite big, how do you and your team plan this? How do you move forward? How do you decide what's next? How you move forward in the app?
I mean, once the MVP is ready, I think it keeps almost the same flow. You prioritize new features. Obviously, bugs have a different standing in such a process. If something doesn't work, all of a sudden you have to fix it. But in general, I will continue like this. So you create new features, you test them, you prioritize them, you build them. I think once you reach MVP, there's not a dramatic change all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. You mentioned before that what you do if users don't like features. I think this is also important that you get rid of them at some point, because sometimes we also had it in our company that we built a feature in our ERP and we thought it will be loved by everyone, but people just work differently. They don't use it at all. And at some point we had to give in and say, okay, you don't want this. And you have to make sure that you don't build stuff because you think it's cool. The users have to approve it basically, or the market or whoever is the end user.
And stay focused. I think that's a really good one, because at Bexio we also had modules. So if you have 100,000 users on it, and then you have modules where there's 900 people using it out of 100,000, but it takes a lot to maintain it and run it. There were so many discussions around that, you know, like this is for some people, this is a super important feature. This is the reason why they are with us, but it's slowing us down from delivering value to the other 99,000. So at some point we just decided to switch them off, give the clients a discount, and also tell them which products they could switch to away from us, if that's their preferred route to go. But I think that's super important, that you don't allow your resources to go everywhere in every little detail, and you don't follow the core improvements, the core user group, the core ICPs that you need to improve towards. We tend to want to do way too much in parallel, and the technology just gets super complicated very quickly. And then, yeah, the errors, the problems, and the maintenance starts ramping up massively.
I'd like to take up we do too much in parallel, because Miran just asked in the chat, what do you do if you have different core versions for an MVP? Would you build two simple versions and test? Sometimes asking the user before building does not work because they don't know well what is better until they use it.
Maybe I can jump in there. We did actually a lot of A/B tests with a very different flows on Mo at our time back then, and I think that's for such a experiment. I think this is the right tool actually to go for. If you think about the concept a little bit, I think it's, even if you have a very different flow for the customers, which looks like a very different platforms, you can still absorb it with a simple code, with the same code base. But then only once you basically get the results, you know on which one you can focus later on more.
But I think it's tricky, right? Trade-off wise, how much time do you invest to build both of them versus one of them? So I think, yeah, and I obviously, you see now, on this we would have different opinions. I personally would prioritize one of them and then say, as a next step, we run an A/B test against the other version, but then we get live earlier and we can collect first feedbacks earlier on. But that might be the wrong direction to go, right? I was always, because I'm not the techie, I was always pushing to try and release earlier somehow. And that has a lot of trade-offs. But in this case, yeah, both are valuable, that you say you try to release it a little later because your prototype or proof of concept is maybe good enough that you can keep the platform afloat a month or two more, and then you start by testing both in an A/B test. My personal recommendation would be try to go live with one as soon as possible and then iterate in an A/B test app.
In terms of scalability, are there any specific considerations that you need to take into account? All of you have started small, now know a lot more about scalability. Are there any specific considerations, or do you have any tips what to look out for? And I think that's from product side, but also tech side.
And what I can add here, and this is just a small input, I hope Nenad and Laurent, they agree, but I'm always very careful about this data quality, even if you have a small product. Obviously, since we're in the subscription business, we have to be even more careful about data quality because we have customers with us for a long journey. But data quality is key, even for small products and projects in our company, and it always paid out because it will slow you down at the later stage if you start with a messy foundation. But I'm happy to hear Laurent and Nenad's opinion on that.
I have this philosophy that basically the platform or the product has to be good enough from the scalability side and from the security perspective, let's say, and all other aspects of the software for the company size as it is now. So you always have to have a platform for the current moment, and the platform has to evolve. So as the company is growing, the traffic is growing, the number of customers, partners, and so on, you have to adapt. And I believe if you would start to build everything according to the books with the highest standards and highest scalability setups and so on at the beginning, you would be super slow. So it has to be good for the current moment, and it has to have a door open to scale properly. So, you know, it helps a lot to have a modular architecture. For instance, if we were looking from the perspective of the technology, then to use best practices for coding, then for to not reinvent the wheel. You can actually get a lot of the things out of the market, not your core business model, of course, but let's say the identity management and stuff like that. There are tools that are ready to go to be used, and they are scalable and so on. So yeah, you have to really make sure that you can scale in the future, also from the hosting infrastructure side and so on.
Mm.
So I think the core architecture is something that is really important because that's the one that you won't change that easily. And that's where you really need someone like Nenad or just a really good technical person to double check that for you. Like, is what you're building today, not the platform as a whole, but the technical architecture, the overall system, the way you're planning it, is this going to be scalable in the future? Are you not creating roadblocks that are too big so that you have to rebuild the whole platform at some point? So yeah, for that, I think you should get help, but the rest you should be able to figure out by yourself.
I have one more question also, and I believe, Nenad, you've touched upon it. The whole data security and security, compliance, cybersecurity, more important than ever. And I know as a startup, you tend to, you know, look at it. If it's a very small thing, you think, yeah, it'll be fine. And then as you scale up, customers become more aware, and you know, people are really, you know, think this is very important. How did you experience that, and how did you deal with that?
I mean, especially at the beginning, people tried to cut corners, obviously, and also to reduce the costs. But nowadays, actually, it's easier than it used to be, let's say 15 years ago, because now we have these big players like Google or AWS and Azure, and all of them, they have their own solutions for databases, which are already covering the highest standards, basically. You as an end customer or developer or someone who is connecting to this service, you just have to follow the guidelines that they give you, and to make sure that you use encrypted connections and things like that. But it is a bit more expensive, but there is a solution already out there. And you just, again, don't reinvent the wheel. Someone already did it super well, super good. Or if you don't want to do it, you want to pay less, then have an expert who will set up properly, in this case, database and all the security around.
With regards to, and I think I'd like to look also at the team again, how you know, go along that journey. Are there any things that you thought were most difficult within the team to go through that journey, learnings that you had along the way, that you could share?
There's certainly a lot. Maybe, yeah, Luis, afterwards you can also tell a bit from your side. It depends a bit, obviously, on what sort of founder setup you have, etc. But in my experience, when I usually had a technical co-founder like Nenad, my job was always to be more on the sales, marketing, product side of things. And in the beginning, you're sort of doing that both, right? The techie person and the sales marketing person are somehow sharing this product development, product owner role, because none of them are really specialized in it, unless you have someone that is specialized. And then over time, the team starts growing. Both of those people are not capable of running this position together anymore. I think that's around the MVP stage. That's actually where it gets crucial. We have to define who takes that hat. So someone is really the product guy, and someone is running the sales marketing, and someone is running maybe the tech part or is coding. You know, that it really depends a bit on your setup. But don't just spread this product role across the team for too long. Nenad and me got to the point several times where we said, man, this is not working. We have to figure out who of us does this, or we have to hire externally. So then at some point I took over the product role, and I was obviously not really capable at it. So yeah, Nenad had a lot of patience with me to let me try and fulfill this role. But then relatively quickly, we said this is a key hire for us at Mobile back then as a marketplace, to have someone that really is capable of taking what customer care says, bring us from the market, the data, translate that into the right features. So I think you can hire very early on a proper product person to help work with the team. And then as you grow, obviously you'll have different people for different teams. And then there's, in the tech department, I think Luis can also say a bit about that afterwards, because they did a lot in the internal testing with low-code platforms such as Bubble. What we also did at Bexio, which I think is quite a good concept if you do it well, was that the IT team was really responsible for the whole platform, but there was an IT team directly in marketing that was responsible for the website, ads, new landing pages, these sort of things. That was a really small unit that technologically reported to Nenad as the CTO, making sure that architecturally we do the right things. But they were really agile and quick in doing their other things, while the core team was then focused on the core product, iterating that and improving that. And I think that was quite a good setup. But I also love what Carvolution is, or Luis is doing in their setup. So maybe Luis, you can say a bit about that as well.
Yes, sure. As Laura mentioned, we do have within Carvolution a project team, which is building MVPs basically. This could be processes or tools or platforms with a low or no code for the entire company. So whenever we have something maybe urgent or a new idea or project, we build it in my team, which is not reporting to the IT stack. And whenever we feel comfortable with our solution, which is obviously really an MVP, and it's not built with a big technology, it's more like with, let's say, our tools that we have, then it gets refined and integrated more deeply into the company. And this is then done by IT. And this helps us to really progress fast, despite being a 5-year-old company, and also make errors and mistakes on a lower scale. And we don't miss, it's sometimes tough to migrate from the MVP to the IT stack because it takes time and it slows stuff down, but you have to do it at some point. But this works for us quite well, and I would do it again if I would work for another company, that you really have a dedicated team that does projects only, because in the daily business, people have enough to do anyway. So you needed a little independent team to work on new stuff. And there's one more addition. It's coming from the resource planning you mentioned earlier. What helps us to align interests was always to first understand what features will bring you. I mean, it could be user growth. A feature could bring you revenue growth. It could be cost reduction, efficiency growth, or whatever. So if you know what a feature is for and you align it with your strategy of a company, I think it's easier to come to an agreement within a big group of people, regardless if they're coming from marketing, finance, or whatever. You have to understand what the feature is for. and where you are at the moment. Because in the beginning of a company, maybe you need user growth and efficiency is not that important. And then you come to a point where user growth is not that important anymore, but you need higher data quality or revenue growth and whatever. Each feature has its purpose, and this helps sometimes to prioritize.
I can only second that also. If you work with OKRs, for example, what makes a lot of sense after the OKR for the quarters are defined, etc., is to have a resource planning together, where you sit down and you say, let's stick to the IT example. Okay, what are the projects going IT's way in this quarter based on these OKRs? And then you'll see that most of the time it's not adding up. There's just too many resources. You need to have way more resources in IT than what you're capable of delivering in this sort of setup. And that's where this approach from Louis' team is amazing, because then you can say, okay, look, these and these and these things, we're not going to give it to IT. Project team can maybe do a shortcut, give it us a way to test this out, break it down, more simple. It will take a lot of pressure away from at the end of the quarter saying, yeah, but IT didn't have time, or operations didn't have time, or whatever. You know that early on. But that's when the team gets a bit bigger, that becomes more important. Smaller teams, it's easier to do that because it's 2 people here, 2 people there, for example. And this is not the most urgent topic.
There is a question for Louis in the chat. When you develop those ideas in your team, do you use the same design language as the main app to try to have a look and feel as if it's a real product, or are you going for a dirty design as well?
We go for a dirty design because it's used internally. In most of the cases, sometimes it's partners that use our platforms. So design is really secondary here. So we obviously, if you have users or an external audience using it, then it's something else. But for us, the design is not relevant for the MVPs.
Even if you do it for users, just flag it as an alpha test, then the user knows. You can say, hey, you get early access to something. And then they'll put up with the design not being great because they know they're early access test users. So, there's ways around that.
Yeah.
I'd like to open the floor for questions that haven't been in the chat yet, and still that the audience would like to get answered. Otherwise, I do have another couple of questions, but I would like to open the floor. Please feel free to speak up. Doesn't look like there are any questions at the moment. So I would like to ask something. And I think as you grow, and it's again something that has to do with resource planning, that's when third-party suppliers or providers come into the game, and which I think always adds another dimension and complexity for the team to manage. And like you have key third-party components or services that enhance your product's functionality. How do you bring it all together?
Maybe I can start this one. So if I understand correctly, the focus is actually on the third-party tools, not external providers in terms of the resources like development. So if it's tools, I actually believe that you should still control the core of your product and your business. But again, everything else that you can buy from outside that is just a standard thing and it exists for a long time and it's well maintained, I would actually consider taking that in, like payment gateways. There is no reason that you integrate with every payment provider. You can just use the gateway that integrates already with all of them. Or as I said, identity management, or ticketing system and things like that. So everything that exists, I would try to leverage that and really control the core, but also make sure that you then depend on these tools. So choose wisely. As I said, the story from Salesforce and Ideal, that was really interesting.
And maybe from the other side, here is one from Thomas. Thanks for the varied discussion. Can you talk briefly about the legal aspects of product launch? It seems that data privacy, GDPR, global issues present a complex challenge.
I think, and yeah, this video is being recorded, so I hope I'm not going to get sued for it. But I think this is usually taken a bit too seriously in the beginning. Even in DSGVO in Switzerland or GDPR, usually you can get a warning before there's a legal consequence for most of the things that you do. Might not happen in all the cases, right? So I'm not saying do cut corners and do stuff the wrong way, but don't over focus on these aspects in the beginning, because you can rectify them as you go. Be aware of certain, I mean, especially if you say legal risks. If you know that you're doing something that is illegal, we don't have to talk about that. That's stupid. But if you're in an area you don't really know what are, different countries, different rules, I would always try to start it slowly and be aware that you have to not slowly, start it quickly and be aware that you have to look at the legal consequences in these markets once you see traction. Because if you start looking at all the legal consequences in all the markets or all the aspects that you might face, you're just doing research instead of building a product and delivering it and then figuring out, I don't know, let me say it like this. In Portugal, this product is not working. Okay, we don't need to look at the legal requirements there. So let's stick to Spain and France, right? So try to do the minimum required work, and everything after that, do it as soon as you see traction, so that you're not going to run into trouble in the long term, but only once you know it's viable. That would be my advice. Luis, maybe you see it differently.
No, I agree. I mean, maybe you can even ask the question yourself. Have you ever heard of a product that failed because of not following privacy guidelines, basically? I mean, you will have other challenges to take. Obviously, do the bare minimum, as Laurent said, but this shouldn't stop you from a release or from building your idea, basically.
And maybe just from a technical perspective, I think there are some no-brainers that you should not do, right? You shouldn't sell data if customer did not agree. You actually have to allow customer to delete the account, like this minimum, and also to download his data maybe. So all these like quick indicators that you're not doing things right, you should actually eliminate. But everything else, it's really a gray zone. We spent sessions and sessions with the video on the mobile case, and then it turned out that you can do that, but maybe it's not necessary. So yeah.
And also depends on the industry. I mean, if you do software for financial services or health, or then obviously maybe you need an external advisor at some point. But I think for many industries, it is really just, as Laura said, do what you have to do, but don't go crazy about it.
Yeah. Just a correction, I said BDO, it's actually Boston Consulting Group. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, maybe I can also add these as a little information. So I think what we experience at the SSA is mostly, I can guarantee you, if you're in healthcare or if you're in fintech, investors will look very closely what you do and whether you adhere to it or not. In other, for other industries, it might be a bit different. So, but in general, as soon as you look for investors, somebody will ask those questions and you better have an answer to it. And so I think that's what you need to be aware of. But in principle, I would fully agree with Nenad and Laurent and Luis's words on that. Are there any further questions? We have 2 minutes left. What is your recommendation with regards to timing of fundraising activities? What are some of your learnings and advice with regards to pre-seed for prototyping versus seed funding in the journey towards the MVP? From Oliver.
That's a tough one, because you can go on about this for a long time. We also have a session coming up on this, by the way, in January or February, where it's bootstrapping versus actually taking VC money or external money. So join that, please. But I think 2 years ago, everybody would have advised you raise as early as you can to build as much as you can. And now in this in the current environment, everybody would tell you, don't raise any money at all. Try to bootstrap as long as you can, right? There's always the certain stream. Some people would then say, if everybody's 6, you should zag, whatever. There's so many opinions out there. My recommendation would be aware that once you start raising money, there's no way back. You can always bootstrap and then raise money later on, right? But raising money and then stopping to raise money, that's a one-way street. Investors will expect you to start hitting revenue numbers, to start growing, to start scaling quite quickly. Unless it's friends and family and fools money, then it's a bit different. But when you get into professional investors, it's always about growth rates, revenue rates, user growth rates, And it quite quickly is less about making sure you hit the next iteration of your product well. So I think wait with that, getting the professional money in as long as you can, and as long as you can see your numbers actually doing the uptick. Otherwise, you might be in for a really hard landing. That would be my super short answer. But Luis, maybe you have something to add, and then we also have a panel on this in 1 or 2 months.
No, agreed. I think it's really tough to find the right moment. If your product is too mature, maybe the vision is gone. If you're too early, they don't have an idea what you will do. And as Laura said, back in the days, some people just raised money with a PowerPoint presentation. This time is over for now, I guess. On the other hand, if you're too mature, people will not believe in a vision anymore. So it's tricky. It also depends on the investor or the VC you're talking to. And sometimes it's a bit frustrating, but some VCs don't even look at your product. They really just look at the financials and non-financials. Sometimes hard to understand, but they really have other metrics than features and the product itself.
Maybe just to add one thing.
Sorry.
Laurent did very well, I think, because it was his job always in the past. We always had a list of potential investors from the strategic point of view. And I think even though if we were not approaching them to raise money directly, he was really staying close to them, doing the regular checkup meetings, exchanging about the product, listening to feedback. The next time he meets them, he says, hey, that was a very good feedback. Look, this is what we did based on your feedback. And doing that like a few times. And then when the moment comes to raise the money, they know everything about you. They already gave feedback. They see that you're applying feedback. So the trust was already built. And you can also see whether this guy or this investor is the right one for you. So I think that's actually what he did super well. And I would recommend to everyone to do that.
Thank you, Nenad. I see that we have Natalia she has raised her hand. Natalia, do you still have your question?
Yes, I do. I want to briefly ask guys on their thoughts or best practices regarding involving users to a feedback. So how often do you advise to measure it? Does it make sense with new features? Like given this a kind of direct democracy also brings you to responsibility to deliver. So how often it is advised? And so any thoughts on this? Thanks.
Luis, do you want to start on this?
I mean, we don't build that much products for external clients, but what we do internally, definitely, we basically observe them, how they use the product, the existing one, and then we understand what they could need. But I think from a testing and voting perspective, you know more about it, I guess.
So what we did at Dexio, for example, was we had I can't remember the name now, but it was basically an idea box, sort of like a website where people could add requests, features, and then they could up and down vote what we should build next. Well, we couldn't build everything because technologically Dexio was a bit stuck at one point. That's why Nenad came in to resolve that. But that was one way to handle this, right? So the clients directly could up and download certain ideas and bring us those. I think, as I said before, the product market fit survey is fantastic. You should do that whenever you can to get as much insights as possible. And then there are all the non-interview topics. I mean, also customer care or sales have a lot of cool feedback if you really structure it properly and look at it properly. But there it's important to me that you quantify it, not meaning that in a bad way, but a lot of clients would come and say, a lot of customer care employees would come and say, this is a problem we really need to solve. This is a big issue. And then you ask, how many times have you heard that? Well, it was at least twice today. So, okay. But in the bigger scheme of things, does this matter or not, right? So that's something, try to always then have the qualitative feedback as often as possible, do as many interviews, as many feedback rounds as you can, but quantify it afterwards or add analytics data to verify the quality of this.
Thank you very much. We're already over time, almost 5 minutes, so I don't want to take up much more of your time. Laurent, Nenad, and Luis, thank you so much for your insights. Thanks everyone for staying with us. And We do have the next webinar of this round. It's on the 1st of February. It's also with Laura. It's with Judith Wemmer from Planted. And we also have Gregory Inauen from Grape, an InsurTech company. And we'll be talking about team, co-founder. So I think that's also going to be team building and co-founder. It's also going to be a very insightful webinar, and then followed by bootstrapping versus venture money at the end of February. So really looking forward to the next one. And thanks everyone for joining. We'll share the profiles in the follow-up email, and feel free to connect with Nenad, Laurent, and Luis, obviously. And looking forward to the next session. Thanks again for all the learnings.
Thank you. Bye-bye.